In this week's episode, I'm joined by Rachel Shaw, her, president at Shaw HR Consulting. This week, our conversation is about beer with a Braille bonus, childcare goes universal, rainbow doors open at the Vatican, and more. Hi there, my name is Bernadette Smith, and I'm a keynote speaker and writer. Welcome to 5 Things in 15 Minutes, where I bring good vibes to DEI. Listen, folks, there's plenty of bad news out there. This show is about the good stuff. Real progress, real stories and ideas that show you what's possible in making your work and life more inclusive, bringing you some proof of positive change. Rachel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Bernadette. I'm so excited to be on your pod. What a wonderful day to start the week.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And so I know that your area of focus in your work is ADA. So let's just back up. ADA, Americans with Disabilities Act. Is that right?
That's right.
So I would love to hear a little bit of your origin story and how you came to this work.
Sure. Well, I started out in HR, and I think they gave me what is considered an other duty as assigned, work that no one really wanted to do in the early days of the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's passed in 1990. I started in HR in the mid-90s, and I got this as a brand new associate and figured out what it was, how to do it, and who knew, but very few people would have guessed that I would have made it my life. And so for the last 20 plus years, all I do is work with employers and employees to support them to find ways to keep people with disabilities working, thriving, and having equal access to employment.
I love that. It is so important. And from what I understand, there's a pretty high unemployment rate for folks with disabilities. Can you give us a little bit of that background?
Yeah, traditionally, folks with disabilities, especially visible disabilities, struggle to either access employment or maintain employment once they're in the workforce. And the whole idea behind the ADA was to not only remove physical barriers, think buses with ramps and curb cuts and elevators, but also that once an employee gets into a workplace, that they have the employer has an obligation to remove unnecessary barriers. And so, unfortunately, we still see some bias or stigma or even perception of non-disabled people when they're interviewing, hiring, or promoting disabled folks. But that's the work I do. The work I do is to create systems and programs to remove bias and to make sure we're hiring the best. And that's really what DEI is all about. Not lowering the bar, just making sure that we're not making the bar higher for folks that may be different than we are.
Love that. That's a great way of looking at it. And I know that there were a lot more folks, from what I understand, with disabilities who were able to enter the workplace during the pandemic because of remote work policies. Has there been any change with the return to work, return to office sort of mandates we've seen?
Well, it's made me very busy, but you're absolutely right. During the pandemic, there was only really one group with a disability that benefited, and that was people whose disabilities were naturally accommodated with remote work. It was a game changer. Many people didn't even realize that going to a physical workplace every day was worsening their conditions, making their conditions more difficult, and impacting or limiting their livelihood and their wellness. And then you go home for anywhere from 12 to 24 months. And as employers started bringing people back to the workplace, and as you know, there is a big return to office push happening right now. And what we're seeing is that now that persons with disabilities have experienced the difference of working remotely or even hybrid, and now that they're being asked to go back to what can be in some cases an arbitrary decision by employers to be back in the office, you're seeing fortunately, you're seeing folks with disabilities advocating for themselves and utilizing their rights under the ADA to say, I need a workplace accommodation. I know that my non-disabled coworkers are going to go back in hybrid or full-time, but I need to stay remote. And the law does afford them, if they have medical need and there's no equivalent alternative, then employers do need to provide them with remote work if they can do their full job safely in a remote environment. So there's a lot of work right now happening in that space to create access for folks with disabilities to stay remote or even stay hybrid if that's benefiting them medically.
Love that. I love that. And I love that that it is in ADA, that it's available to them. And especially if it's something that they now have a kind of I don't know, for lack of a better word, a taste of, both the employer and the employee, it's something that hopefully will stick.
Agreed. There's a lot of emotion around it for employers. Some employers feel like some employees might be taking advantage or even misusing or lying about having a disability because they just prefer to work remote. And that's where process comes in. Employers don't get to just say, I believe you, Bernadette, you get to stay remote. Rachel, I don't believe you, you have to come back in. The ADA requires employers have consistent process, and they use medical data to guide decisions instead of whether they believe or disbelieve. And so there is definitely a lot of emotion right now around remote work. I think it will settle out in a couple of years. It's just, for a lot of employers, remote work was never on the radar until COVID. Now, for some employers, they haven't seen their employees in 100 years. It's not a big deal. But for a lot of employers I support, remote work was so new, and it's seen by some as desirable, or for others, it's simply a life requirement. It's simply a basic need. But for a lot, I think a lot of employers are worried that it's being misused or abused. And so we're doing a lot of work right now in this space to advocate and make sure that employees with need are getting that accommodation, even if it's not the preference of the employer. And also making sure that employees aren't asking for it if they don't need it. They just moved or they don't want to come to the office. We need to make sure we preserve and protect those spaces for those people with medical need. And so there's definitely some movement, and there's a lot of work going on in that space, but I think it will settle out in a couple of years, and it will be, I think in the future, everyone will work remote or hybrid. I think in the future, when jobs support it, it's just going to be almost a necessity if you're going to recruit and keep talent. But for now, there's definitely still a lot of push and pull on return to office protocols.
That makes a lot of sense. And so with the anti-DEI movement that's sort of taken place here in the past year and a half or so, how has that impacted ADA work, if at all? Is accessibility becoming, is it lumped in enough with DEI to be impacted by the backlash?
Yeah. I mean, I think no one ever thought of disability inclusion as part of DEI before.
Right.
Unfortunately, and the reason for the backlash is that there's an assumption that DEI really focused on women or African-American women or certain subgroups, where DEI is for everyone. DEI is about inclusion and equality and diversity for everyone. But I don't think there's necessarily been a real focus because people didn't lump us in. They saw it. But what we're seeing is a lot of employers see ADA as a compliance, as a compliance piece. They don't see it as a benefit to the workplace. They haven't identified that having a person with a disability on a workforce, in a work group, in a C-suite is a benefit. And so I think what we're continuing to do is what I always say is, my job is to change hearts and minds. And if there's no heart showing up to the game, if employers don't see the value in having true diversity represented for the purpose of higher profits, more job satisfaction, better retention, if they're not going to see the heart part of it, then I've got to go after their mind and help them understand why this is good for business, why this is expected, and why you need to do this if you want to be able to compete in your industry.
So well said. And I love how passionate you are about this. I can tell that you can talk about this for a long time and that it's something that excites you. So I love that. Great. Well, in this week's 5 Things newsletter, I wrote a little bit about how the news is so exhausting these days. And for so many reasons, folks are burnt out. They're doom scrolling, they're stressed, they're worried, they're anxious. There's so much going on. And I just want to bring back this reminder periodically, connection before content, even at work. So leaders, don't jump straight into the agenda. Ground your meetings first by taking a breath, by giving folks a chance to be human first, build in a check-in. To ask folks, what's going right this week? What's going not? Just share something quickly. And then if there needs to be follow-up later, check in later, one-on-one. But this stuff needs to be intentional and it needs to be consistent if you want to have a team that trusts you. So just putting that reminder out there to leaders, because it's something that can be very easily dismissed or kind of the first thing to go. In this such fast-paced world where there's so much change.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well said. Well, I love what you said, because what I train a lot on is mental health support. And, Gallup did a poll recently. 67% of the workforce expects their supervisors to identify and respond if they're struggling. And this is such a new expectation. I would say the younger generation, and I'm talking like 40 below, I'm not talking about the brand new folk, but we expect that our workforce is going to care about how we are doing, not just about whether we're producing. And that, I think, really goes to that authentic check-in. We're not talking about what's your favorite dessert at the check-in, but really something that is meaningful and authentic, where you can tell that your leadership, your supervisor, your manager cares about you and understands that you're bringing your whole self to the job, and we care about your whole self. So what I always tell folks and employers is, we need to understand and care about, if someone on your team appears to be struggling and you're not identifying that, you're sending a message that they don't matter other than their productivity. And that is not going to keep good employees. They want connection. They want to be cared about, and they want to be trusted and invested in, but they also want that other piece. And so I completely agree. I'm very excited, because I know that the folks that are going to take over the leadership roles in the next 5 to 10 years, they also want that. And I think we'll have a little bit less of the divide of just do your job and get your check, and that's how I tell you you're important, versus, how is it? How are you doing? Let's do a quick check-in, and really meaning it and listening, not as a checkbox before we do what we want to do. So I love that,
Awesome. Well, let's get into this week's Good Vibes. The first story this week comes from Johns Hopkins University, where engineering students designed a Braille printer for the state's largest employer of blind and low vision workers. So unlike typical machines, this machine features open hardware, tactile components, and accessible software, allowing employees with vision loss to operate it independently. And its first run were 400 Braille beer labels for a fundraising brew called Blind Spot. So cool.
So cool. So cool. Love it. I mean, talk about making accessibility easy. It's exhausting to need the world to help you be part of it. And, Braille is part of that. If you have that language and you are vision impaired, it is amazing to not have to ask or have to seek out the answer, to not have to use some expensive technology, but to have the world just show up and say, you're important enough for us to give you, this information. And what a great sales. I mean, if I was blind, I would buy beer that had Braille. I would be like, I'm going to support that. So I always say to employers, it's hearts and minds. I do stuff because I am a passion-driven and a mission-driven person. But also there's bottom line in it. There's money in making the world accessible and easy for folks that have dollars and want to spend. And the disability community has money, they want to spend it, and they want to be valued. And this is a way to show that. I love that. And who doesn't want a beer? I mean, really.
Exactly. And I love a good win-win. And that's exactly what you're talking about is finding the win-win. And they're always there, right? We just have to,
that's right.
Again, the hearts and minds. Okay, the second story this week comes from Tufts University in Massachusetts, which announced it will cover tuition for U.S. undergraduate families earning under $150,000 a year. So students from households under $60,000 will receive loan-free aid, while others may still face costs for housing, food, and books. So we've seen other universities do this recently as well. But, tuition at Tufts is $90,000 a year. So this is a huge move, especially for first generation and middle income students historically excluded from private universities.
Yeah. I recently wrote an article about how important it is that we create access, because the ripple effect, right? Mm-hmm. And, the reason this is so important is it's not just, you can get a great education anywhere. We have community colleges doing amazing work. We have local universities, state universities. But I always say the first opportunity that a lot of folks have for true diversity and inclusion experiences is when they go away to college, because you are in dorms and eating halls, and you are doing in experiments and doing classroom work with people that don't think like you, look like you, live in your neighborhood. And that is your first opportunity to see others as something other than other, but as your friends, your neighbors, your best friends, your partners. And so getting into that four-year university is an experience and education in itself. One of the things I often think about when I think about how important it is that we create access opportunities is not everyone has the same path. And by creating an opportunity, there'll be more people trying to get to that path. I took out over $100,000 to student loans when I went to a four-year university. And it took me 15 years to pay it off. And it was so impactful. My child, because of my experience, is at a four-year university and will not have to take out student loans. In one generation, my entire family's history changed. This is how we create the most diversity in the C-suite, is we've got to get people in those classrooms in the most prestigious schools. And we're not going to do it if we're telling these folks to take out $500,000 in student loans that are now at 9% interest rates. So I'm super excited. There's lots of amazing universities. This is very good news for all of us.
It is, especially with the overturning of affirmative action. This is a great way to still have that kind of diversity in the student population. All right. The third story this week comes from New York State, which just made school meals free for every student, saving parents about $165 per child per month and ensuring kids can learn without hunger holding them back. So students with better nutrition achieve higher grades, but food insecurity disproportionately impacts low-income families, immigrant communities, and children of color. So this is a great equity move from New York.
That's great. And, there's states, California, Colorado, Maine, Massachusetts. There's a whole bunch of states that have also done this. And, again, it's the right thing to do. Who would argue against feeding kids? But the way they're doing it is creating an opportunity for all students to sit together and not have otherism. Someone's bringing in DoorDash, someone has their amazing bento box from their parent, and then you've got a kid who's getting the free lunch that's sub-quality because they're only making maybe 50 or 100 servings. Now we've got everyone eating the same food in the same environment. There's no otherness. And, the bottom line is it's the right thing to do, but we all know that, you can't think, you can't learn. You're not building that muscle memory if you're in that classroom and you're hungry. And if anyone has never been food insecure, you don't understand how much time and brain capacity is taken up with the worry about that food insecurity. It really is an unbelievable distraction for a child to not know if or when they're going to have that next meal. And to remove that, it's phenomenal. This just makes sense. This is the mind part of it, right? Smart strategy, so that we can have more productive communities and more productive states. So I'm super excited about it.
And it's a great way to kind of address a root cause of a lot of other problems. All right. The fourth story this week comes from New Mexico, which became the first U.S. state to guarantee free universal childcare, eliminating income requirements and saving families an average of $12,000 per child annually. The program also boosts pay for early childhood educators to at least $18 an hour and expands facilities to meet increased demand. So this is a huge thing for anyone who's ever paid for childcare, because that is a huge systemic barrier for folks, especially women who feel kind of pushed out of the workforce if they have to decide between paying for their childcare and raising their own kid. Yeah.
And it's going to be even more important as we start to defund different social programs that support women to stay home with their children, or, partners to support. I am hoping that this goes the same direction that we're seeing the free lunch programs and we're seeing the tuition-free programs. It's a new thing. New Mexico is the first state to do it. We have some other programs, First Five in some states, California, for example, Louisiana, Georgia have pre-kindergarten where they've tied it and linked it into schools, but it's not the same. This is very new. And I think it is unbelievably important, especially if we're going to expect people to have their children, to raise their children, to work while they're having their children, and to give them a safe option. Because a lot of childcare that folks are settling for when they have those financial barriers is not the safest environment. And so this is just makes so much sense. And we can't wait for corporations to do this on a one-off. It's just not going to expand far enough.
Sure.
You're not going to see a fast food restaurant providing childcare. And so I love this, and I hope that it shows a true return on investment for the state so that we can see other states picking it up and taking up that cause. But super proud of New Mexico, and I hope it continues to grow.
Absolutely. When it does, you can be sure to hear about it on 5 Things in 15 Minutes. All right. The last story this week comes from the Vatican, where for the first time in history, 1,400 LGBTQ plus Catholics and allies from 20 countries made a pilgrimage to the Vatican, officially recognized as part of the Jubilee year. First time. And I grew up Catholic and I am a lesbian. So this was definitely an impactful story for me. I can't even imagine having what it would have been like in my childhood to see this as a possibility.
Yeah. I mean, I think many of us want more, but Pope Francis started this with allowing the acknowledgement that we are all humans and love is love, and blessing relationships. And I will tell you, I am where I look for good news, knowing that the Catholic Church is one of the, and I was also raised Catholic, is one of the most conservative environments that you can find, or at least was, but what we're seeing with the new Pope Leo, and a continuation, I feel like there was an intentional goal of the church not to go back, because there was a lot of focus and wanting to go back to a more conservative, to a more early doctrine. And so the continuation of Francis's understanding that love is love and humans are human and who are we to judge, that whole idea, I'm hoping will continue to grow. I don't know what the church will do ultimately, but I think that Pope Leo is clearly not going to take us back. And I hope that we just continue to see a progression of that, because, there's no need. And like, Pope Francis said, who are we to judge? So I'm hoping we just continue to see a true understanding that we are all equal. And if you believe in God, we are all equal under the eyes of God and all deserving of that love. And if you don't, then the goddess or whatever you believe in.
Mm-hmm. I couldn't agree more. And I hope that the political leaders are paying attention, that we are all equal and deserve equal access and equal rights. Okay. This was great, Rachel. Thank you. Well, let's move into this week's Good Vibes to Go. I'll share my good vibe to go, and then I'll invite you to share your good vibe to go. So it is officially National Hispanic Heritage Month, and I have a great book recommendation. Read the novel Anita, Monte Laughs Last by Xochitl Gonzalez, which is a delightful book being adapted by Eva Longoria for film. Now, I actually used to be a wedding planner. Some folks know that, and so did Xochitl. So we were friends in our wedding businesses. And so it's been really cool to see her career as a novelist really take off. So check out that book. All right, Rachel, what is your good vibe to go?
My good vibe to go is that I would encourage everyone to go out there, and if you're Instagram, if you're whatever your social is, go find someone who is out there saying the right thing, that, in the right space, who is creating that energy and that love and that inclusion, and forward their message, like them, participate. Let's get the good news out there. Let's stop circulating the bad news and the hate, and let's start focusing on the world that we know we will get, and let's get there quicker. So that's my good vibe, is get out there and make your algorithm all positive happiness, focused on the right people doing the right thing.
I love that. Great advice. And if anyone wants to follow me on Instagram, I don't post a lot, but it's @_Bernadette_Smith. All right, Rachel, how can folks get in touch with you?
They can follow me at official Rachel Shaw on Instagram or Facebook, or email me, rachel@rachelshaw.com. I would love to talk with you and work with you and support you. And if nothing else, I look forward to your positive posts out there in the world, creating more happiness, more inclusion, more diversity, and more hope.
I love it. Thanks so much, Rachel. You've been a wonderful guest. And folks, if you don't already get the 5 Things newsletter, you can subscribe at 5thingsdei.com. Have a great week. Thank you for listening to 5 Things in 15 Minutes. I hope you found yourself inspired by at least one of this week's stories. If you did, would you mind sharing it with a colleague and leaving us a review on your favorite podcasting platform? And if you don't already get my 5 Things newsletter, join at 5thingsdei.com. I'm Bernadette Smith, and I'll see you next week right here for 5 Things in 15 Minutes. bringing good vibes to DEI.